The Bob Murphy Show, episode 349.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. Today I am going to be interviewing Susanne Gibbs, who has a new book out called The Homeschooling Quick Start. And it, as the name suggests, is a quick guide, very easy read in terms of you want to homeschool, here's everything you should know before you jump into it. And it's very encouraging, right? So I think it's aimed primarily at parents who have been toying with the idea of homeschooling, but they just need a little nudge to get them over that indecision and worry. The publisher is connected with David Ramsey Steele, so that's how this came on my radar, that he reached out and said they have this new book they're trying to promote, and I thought it looked fine, so here is my conversation with Susanne Gibbs. Susanne, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the book, folks, is The Homeschooling Quick Start, and I guess the first thing to ask is what's your background and what led you to write this book?
Yes, so my background, I actually, if you probably hear my accent, I'm not from this country. I was born in Germany and raised in Germany.
Oh, I thought you were from Louisiana.
Yeah, Louis, right? It's got that southern German accent. So I was raised in Germany, went to school and did a gap year, came to the United States and lived with a family for a year. And was exposed for the first time to an American culture. And one of the things that really intrigued me was the approach, what I experienced I'm mainly now talking about the church that I went to. That's where I experienced family interaction, parents and their children. And what really impressed me was that parents, adults in general, really respected and treated children as not, I don't want to say equals, but the way I grew up in Germany was children are kind of heard and not seen. No, the other way around, seen and not heard. And so there isn't that same respect, so to speak, how children were treated here. And that really appealed to me. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really how I would want to, that's the environment I would want to raise my kids in. So this is even way before I was thinking about having a family I was thinking about having a family, but not homeschooling or any of that.
Right.
So that's the first thing that really impressed on my heart, that the American culture is just very child friendly. That's not what I experienced. Now, there are a lot of, I don't want to be all negative about Germans, and but where I grew up and how I grew up in the setting that I grew up in Berlin, that's just how it was. Busy.
Can I ask you, Susanne, just on that point? So, as I'm sure you also realized, Americans don't know much about anything outside the United States. So is part of that just like to more generalize that the American culture is more individualistic, and so like treating children as individual entities as opposed to, well, you're part of the family and that's how you should be classified? Yes,
I believe that that's a very good statement or description. Germans are rule followers. And I mean, I'm just generalizing. Obviously, you have, lots of Germans that are like, you saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic. Germany generally followed the rules, and you had a couple of people that are like, I'm not, masking up and all that stuff. But more so than in America, where people are just generally wanting to do their way. But yeah, so that is something that really appealed to me, is this individualistic mindset that's not very European in general. Again, people might think, oh, that's so prejudiced, whatever. But from my experience, that's how I see it. That's how I experienced it growing up in Germany. And I grew up during the Cold War as well. Like I was almost 15, and I share that in the book a little bit, in the part where I talk about history and how we are all integrated in events, historical events that shape us, that shape our being, our worldview. And I share kind of how that affected me and how I view the world. And I grew up, in West Berlin, in an enclave, essentially, surrounded by East Germany. And I was in the free sector, like in the free part. But that didn't mean we could just get in the car and drive wherever we wanted. We had to have a passport that is appropriate for East German travel through East Germany. So it wasn't an international passport. So we had two passports. One was for specific travel through East Germany, and then one was for travel internationally, which meant we had to travel through East Germany. And then if you wanted to go, unless you flew, and then it's a different story. But most Europeans back then didn't fly as much. It was more driving because Europe isn't all that big compared to America.
Right. So when did you move to the United States?
I permanently moved here in 1997.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
Okay. So you get here in general, besides just the individualistic focus and so on, and treating kids as beings with their own preferences and desires and whatnot. So that opened you up. And then at what point did you start seriously considering homeschooling?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I grew up in, excuse me, in Germany, where it's illegal to homeschool. So my mindset was, of course, I wouldn't want to homeschool. I mean, actually, it wasn't even on my mind. And once I started having kids, I'm like, of course, they're going to go to school. Well, it was when my oldest son, I have 4 kids, by the way, and he's now graduated and has a college and has a job. But when my oldest son was 5, or actually he was still 4, getting ready to be 5, and of course in kindergarten and all these things. So I thought, oh my goodness, I have to actually now seriously consider, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I did school shopping. My husband and I were talking about homeschooling, but he wasn't really a fan, and because we didn't know anybody really that did that, and I didn't know anything about it, and I thought, there's just no way I can do this. I can't pull this off. So I went school shopping, and I went to public schools and private schools. I think I visited 5 or 6 schools, and I wasn't so impressed with a lot of them. And then one of them I loved, and so that's where my oldest son, where we enrolled him in kindergarten. It was a private Christian school. Oopsies. Sorry about that. And so that is the beginning of our school journey. And then, of course, I did the whole school parent thing, get involved and be a lunch mom and all these things. And then my other 2 kids followed. And when he went into was ready to be into 8th grade, into 8th grade, we ran into a little bit of a problem with, I'm not really sure. I think he needed glasses or something. There was something that caused him to not be able to be in 7th grade, during 7th grade, to just academically thrive, if you want to put it that way. And I spent a lot of time in the evenings with him, and I thought, I just, I'm doing this, like, I feel like I'm homeschooling. And then my husband and I thought, well, this is ruining your evenings, and this is going on for a couple of months. And it worked, like, he did well, but with my help. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do this. So that's how we started. So this is like this long process. So here we're talking kindergarten, and he went through 7th grade, and all my other kids started school, and same school. And that is kind of what brought that back into our attention. So yeah, homeschooling.
All right. And so then what made you decide to write a book on it?
That is a completely different story. I never even thought I never thought any of this would happen. So we had moved, we lived in West Virginia for almost 20 years, moved to Illinois now, live in Illinois. And we met somebody who's a publisher, and who is very interested in education. And actually, David Ramsey Steele, whom you also had on your show previously, he is the editor for Kara's books. And Mr. Karras, he and I talked about education, and we kind of got to talking, and he was interested in homeschooling, how I do this with my kids. And then he asked me, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I'm like, I don't have time for this. And a couple of years go by, and I thought, well, he asked me a couple of times actually. And at some point I thought, well, maybe I should. Hey, what the heck?
Mhm.
So I'll just started jotting a few ideas down, and that's how that whole thing started. Because
Okay, great.
I did see a need over the years of my homeschool journey. So this started in 2011 or 12. I think 2011 is when we started homeschooling two of our kids, and then we pulled the other two out of the school and did all
Mm.
four. But in 2011, yes. So over those years, I met so many parents, people in general, who were curious about homeschooling but didn't think they could do it. And that was exactly my experience. And I realized I could do it. I mean, it's very intimidating. And I reach out and genuinely feel for people who have that feeling of inadequacy and feeling they're letting their kids down by making this choice of homeschooling. And I just want to encourage them and provide information. Read this book, and it can be done. It's not that difficult. There's so much out there that helps.
Yeah, I think in my experience, I mean, I suppose one thing is people will say, well, we can't because we need two incomes. But if it is financially
Right.
possible for one to
Right.
stay home, then yeah, that's the second biggest objection or concern I've heard is just, well, I don't, I don't know all these different subjects, and how could I possibly give a better education than people who are specialized in those respective areas? And so, what in general, how would you reassure someone who has that concern?
I would, and I write that in the book. I have actually a whole, I don't want to call it chapters, like a subchapter on
Mm,
feeling inadequate and feeling like I don't have the necessary education. There's, of course, Americans are very, and that's Western, that's not just Americans. Westerners are generally very title driven, like, oh, if you have a PhD, that means you're really smart and you could do this. But if I don't have a college education, or have a little bit, or I just have a bachelor degree in whatever, there's no way I can even do any of this. No, actually, there is a lot to be said for statistically speaking, and also from a market standpoint. On the market is just so much material available for
mhm,
that is encouraging, that's open and go, that's for all homeschool philosophies, that's for all parents in all kinds of situations. Libraries also carry a bunch of stuff. So for those who are on a budget, you can a lot of times check out. There are certain libraries that are homeschool friendly. I've noticed that there are some libraries who have a wealth of homeschool curriculum available. So I've checked out and tried it
mhm,
out to see if I would like it. But then statistically speaking, to get back on that, there is just really strong evidence that parents who homeschool have this exact fear, or I don't want to call it fear, but concern, that they need to get their kids out there, and that they need to stay involved in the community, that they have to have a high standard because otherwise they're not going to measure up. So that's in a certain from a certain to a certain extent, that's a healthy thing, a helpful thing, because that keeps them striving for better and not just stay home all day and let your kids watch TV or something.
mhm.
Homeschool parents overall, generally speaking, have a very high standard of education if you look at it from a statistic
Yeah.
perspective.
The other thing too, just on that, is I think sometimes the people who are saying, well, gee, I'm not qualified. I couldn't teach math and English and history. Like, I don't know all those subjects, but they're also holding up a sort of unrealistic ideal of what the school's going to give them. Whereas, like, we sent my oldest son to a very expensive private school, and he would come home and tell me stories. It was a parent teacher conference, and his math teacher was complaining that she put the wrong formula for the volume of a cube on the board,
Ugh.
and my son had corrected her, and she was complaining to us that he was kind of cheeky in the way he did it. And I didn't say this. I was like, well,
Yeah.
one solution would be don't write the wrong formula on the
Right.
board. That would nip this problem in the bud. But anyway,
That's funny. Well, good for your son
yeah.
to speak up.
Okay, so, and I think probably with each passing year, it just gets easier, right? That is, especially, and with COVID
Yes.
and everything too, and people having to teach their kids anyway at home for a while, that they saw, well, this isn't that hard, and there's all these curricula. All I got to kind of do is be a coach. It's not so much that I have to.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And there's now, if I compare it to when we first started homeschooling about 2011, there was already a ton out there. I don't want to but compared to today, it's unbelievable. The homeschool market, curriculum market has just exploded in the last 10 years. It's unbelievable. And there is so much available online. And while I'm not a big fan of only online, it is definitely a really great introduction. I use online classes for my kids, but not only because I do that's the point I'm homeschooling. I do want input. I want to give my kids input. There's a whole story besides the academics why I chose to homeschool, why my husband and I chose to homeschool our kids. And it's not all about the academics because we're not that smart. It's not like I'm a super smart person that needs, feels like, oh, I know everything and I need to teach my kids and I'm the only one qualified. So definitely not. But we are, one of the parts in the book that I describe is the importance of worldview nowadays that is really in the public schools just very pushed aside. It's not, but then it is. So I'm saying it's pushed aside because nobody really wants to admit that the worldview that's being taught is a worldview. They just want to say we're objective, we're neutral. That is not possible. You can't be objective and neutral. Right. And from a logical standpoint, there's no such thing as being neutral. Books have been written about the myth of neutrality. It's just not possible. Everybody has this. This is one of the things also back to the history chapter that I wrote and where I share my story of having grown up in the section of Berlin that was free, yet was an enclave. I saw these images of Russian tanks. The wall fell. I was there. My dad took me and we walked around, and it was not really scary to me because I was used to seeing all these things. Now, if I saw my kids doing all these things, I would probably say, I'm gonna, don't go there. So, but that's something that shaped me, and that includes my worldview. And so that's actually my one of the things that's on my heart is to communicate to parents, especially, and to really everybody, but specifically parents who are raising the next generation, that they realize and are actually intentional about what they're teaching their children, and that everything that you teach to your children is attached or has a big, it's not just the specific topic you're teaching. There is a worldview attached to it. You can't get away from it. And once you get used to that idea that there's worldview attached to pretty much every topic in life, it makes sense, and you recognize it everywhere. You see it. That's learning how to think. That's one of the important things. Recognizing, when you walk your children through, let's say, reading a book and discussing all these literary devices and all these things. Really, we're not looking for kids growing up to be English majors and very, that they write their own books and become these super smart English people, but it's just about learning how to think, learning how to analyze a situation that presents yourself. You recognize themes, you recognize problem areas, you recognize just all kinds of things that present themselves through stories or through any kind of thing that you read or watch on TV. That's what we're looking for, is teaching our children how to think properly about these things that present themselves in everyday life and know what they're thinking and recognize it, rather than having an opinion that has no foundation.
Folks, let's take a break from the action for this special announcement. Time is running out, and I mean that in two senses. First, look at the world. Things are spiraling out of control. Your time to prepare for this is running short. The second sense is your time to get ready for the ExPat Money Summit is also running short, because it occurs on October 7th through 11th. So hurry up and get ready for it. What is the ExPat Money Summit, you say? It's the world's largest offshore event. It's put on by Mikkel Thorpe, host of the ExPat Money Show. So this, to be clear, is entirely online, again, October 7th through 11th. If you attend the seminar, you're going to see why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You're going to learn everything you need to know about getting your Plan B up and running, such as acquiring a second passport, diversifying your finances offshore, investing in international real estate. And you're going to get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. These include people like Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, and Tom Luongo. Now, I'm going to be participating as well. I'm on a VIP panel devoted to the topic of de-dollarization and, the pace with which we might expect that and some of the complications arising from it and ways that we think it may play out. To get your complimentary ticket, just go to expatmoneysummit.com. However, if you want to have access to the VIP panels, which includes me, you're going to have to go ahead and get the VIP pass. If you do so, make sure you use promo code Murphy to get a special discount. So again, the general event, it's free. Go to expatmoneysummit.com. But if you want to get the VIP pass, make sure you use promo code Murphy. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, just on that point. So I was a college professor for a few years, and I noticed of my students coming up through. It was Hillsdale College. If people know that.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of the students who went there came from conservative or libertarian families that a lot of them were religious, and so there were a lot of homeschool students going through that were my students that had been homeschooled by their parents when they were younger. And I did notice it wasn't necessarily that the homeschooling students were always better academically, but what I did know for sure is if I assigned a paper, they understood what it meant to go to pick a thesis and defend it. Whereas a lot of the other students that were, just traditional, like going through public school or whatever, they just thought they were doing a book report. Like they just went out and grabbed some sources and said, this person said this and this person said, they didn't understand what I said. Yeah, but what's your thesis statement? And they'd looking at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you talking about? So
Right.
Just that's what I mean. The homeschools that they understood what it meant to have an opinion and to defend it with reasoning. And they understood that procedure.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for the value of conversation, just on a very basic level, even where the parents and the students, their kids, interact. And that is something that's when you integrate it into your day, that comes very natural. If you're having your child in a regular school, brick and mortar school setting, it just becomes very difficult to have intentional conversations. I mean, from a practical standpoint, I've been in those shoes, so I totally get it. You drop your kids off in the morning at school, or the school bus comes and get them. The mornings usually look like, oh my goodness, is your backpack packed, and have you had breakfast and all these things? And then they come home in the afternoon, it's like, oh, homework and extracurricular, football, soccer, whatever, depending on season, and evening activities, whatever, even if you do church or whatever. The problem is that it becomes so focus driven on these activities that a normal conversation that we would have around the dinner table is impossible. It's very difficult because like I would just sit there and think I need to have a conversation with my child, but I don't even know what to talk about because my brain is just frazzled. I'm just thinking about, what to do next and what to do next. And so that becomes very tricky unless you plan ahead, right? That's always a good thing, planning ahead. But like, if you're, running your kids around, planning ahead is not talking about conversation, but have you packed your, cleats and your food and whatever. So that's a really, really great blessing of homeschooling, is having these conversations with your kids when their brain is fresh. You don't want to have a conversation with your kids after they come home from school and you ask them, oh, what was your day? Great. Or okay. And then, oh, by the way, let's have this deep conversation. It's just not going to happen. But if you're homeschooling, that's just something you build into your morning when their brains are fresh. And sometimes the conversations happen, sometimes they do not. There is no pressure, but they usually do happen on one level or another and at one point or another during the day. So that's really, and that's back to your point about college students being able to understand what they're thinking and how to communicate it, or at least categorize their thoughts. That is just something that comes about through these conversations, because you can practice and practice and practice some more. You don't just think and learn to communicate by, it just comes naturally to people. Some people it comes more naturally than others, but it's a learned process. Nobody is born with this ability to logically communicate everything that they're thinking. There is a practice that has to take place, and that is very important to do that in the home, in my opinion, because I am the parent and I have certain values I would like to communicate to my children, that they would also have these values, and that is something that happens through these conversations.
Okay, great. Let's see. Maybe can we jump to? I'm just looking over the topics in your table of contents. You mentioned the different states. So is that one thing that parents who are considering this need to like look up and say, oh, the state that I'm living in, I gather it differs a lot from state to state.
It does. It doesn't differ a great deal. My favorite website, and I've researched, this was about 6 months ago, so maybe something else popped up in the last 6 months, but HSLDA is the short for Homeschool Legal Defense Association. When you go to their website, HSLDA, I think it's .org, I believe, their information. So there's like up in the menu, you click on legal or something, and then it what you end up with is the screen with the whole country, United States, on it, and all 50 states. And you click on your state, and it gives you the regulations for your state. Generally speaking, there is not one state where you have to ask anybody for permission. Mm-hmm. You tell the state. Now, here's where it varies. There are states that have higher regulations where you have to maybe have your children assessed more frequently than in other states. In some states, like Illinois, no assessment is required at this point. As far as like SAT or the Iowa state test or SAT-10, those Stanford achievement tests, those what kids do in schools usually in grades 1 through 12, they have to take these standardized tests. I assume that's still the case, but it varies from state to state as well, and what the schools do. But like in the state that my kids spent most of their time homeschooling, in West Virginia, at the time, it was relatively strictly regulated. So I had to send in the fact that I'm homeschooling. It's called a notice of intent. And that's, every state usually has that. Well, like Illinois, you don't do anything. So I take that back. Some states you just do nothing, no communication whatsoever. But in West Virginia, at the time when we lived there, had to send in the last year's assessment tests, just so that they see. I don't even know if anybody looked at it, to be honest with you. Right. But, it's like, is anybody actually looking at these? But okay, here they are. Then I had to turn in the curriculum that I will use for next year in 5 subjects. So that was like math, social studies, reading, language arts, and science. 5 areas. I believe those were the 5 areas. I had to show what I'm going to use to teach these. Later on, right before we moved to Illinois, that was made a little easier, and all I had to do is check a box, say, yep, I will teach these 5 subjects. And I didn't have to but send in any curriculum names. So those would be the differences. So like in Illinois, I've not communicated with anybody about anything. As far as I'm concerned, they don't even know I exist. We just moved here and continued to homeschool. New York is probably more on the New York State on the higher regulation side, where you have to send in stuff every like 6 weeks or something. There's a constant checkup on, are your students learning anything? So I find that a bit intimidating, but I do know that you need other people, and if you're in a group that helps you do that, then there are ways to make it work. Obviously, there are tons of New York homeschoolers, so they make it work where they either do it and they know what they're doing because they've done it for years, or if you start out, find a group, go online. They have tons of groups online, available, and then you go visit them. And their stuff, paper, recommendations on how to deal with this. Definitely very helpful.
And also, are there hybrid arrangements where you figure out that somebody local to you is good at math, and so like there's some homeschool, like everyone, like 8 people who are homeschooling take their kids there on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and they all learn math from that person, algebra or something? Is that?
Yes, that's definitely a thing. So there are a couple of ways of doing it. One way of doing this is called a homeschool co-op, and that is a more official way of doing this, where there is actually, think of a school kind of that meets once a week, and they give you all your assignments. You do class, you do it pretty much all days, like from 8 to 3 or something, and it functions like a school. And then they give you the assignments for the rest of the week, and you then go home and every day you work on those assignments. That's more formal. Yes, there definitely are groups that meet and only do math, and it's literally parents that just happen to be, they know each other, or their kids know each other from somewhere, sports, I don't know, or they live in the same neighborhood. And one of the parents says, I've noticed that you like that your kid talks about it would be so much more fun. You're struggling in this area. Would you want help, or would you, or I'm struggling in this area. Would you mind teaching this to my children? And all of a sudden, you have like 5, 6 families gathering together once a week and doing math together, or doing composition. Math is really more specific to, what's the likelihood that you have somebody that is on the same math level. But like composition, you can combine, I don't know, like a 6th grader to a 12th grader. Or, first grader to a 4th grader. You have a bigger variety of ages that you can combine with certain subjects. But yeah, definitely math, science, any of that. That's, and the parents are the ones who will be doing the grading. So it doesn't matter who teaches your children. You, the parent, will be the one making the assessment and making the decision on, does this count? How well is my student progressing? So definitely. And that is also, I really highly recommend, if that's possibility, for parents to find other parents and get together and do this together, because it is so encouraging. And the likelihood that you don't burn out is just way bigger, higher likelihood that you thrive, that your kids thrive. Because really, there's a lot of burden on the parents. It can feel really heavy at times, and it's just really important that we stay connected with other parents in this journey.
And along those lines too, like, it's, if your kid's in 7th grade and wants to learn French or something, you can just have a tutor come for that one thing.
Yes, exactly. You can do that if you know somebody. There's online. The problem with French or German or any of these languages is, like, if you're a parent and you want your child to learn this, but you have virtually no experience. Like, I don't even know how to say these things, right? How are you going to do that? There's online stuff where you can hear the words pronounced. There's actually, I recommend, I have a chapter on foreign language, how I recommend doing this and how I did it with my own children. Obviously, I'm a little advantaged because I am German. When we speak German, then I know how to say these things. When I read them, I pronounce them correctly. But, other languages, I would have to find out, well, how do I say this? My daughter wanted to do Mandarin, and I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. So she did Mango. That's like online, sort of like Duolingo, Mango, all these foreign language things. And so that it doesn't teach you really fluency, but it gets you exposed. I think that's so important, that the kids get exposed to foreign languages in all kinds of areas, settings. I think multicultural, I think that's a great advantage that we can give our kids.
And then I'm curious your thoughts. I noticed we didn't end up sending him there, but when my eldest was young and we were shopping around, we had considered some Montessori programs, and there it really drove home the difference between the 12 kids going through all hearing the same stuff, and then that necessarily means they all have to progress at the same pace. Whereas if it's more of an individual track, that you just the kids go dive in, and it's more self-directed, and that if you're really good at math and you can absorb it, you might be 3 grade levels ahead of your peers, but maybe you're not as good at history or art or something, and so you don't go through, and instead of just having everybody progress at the same rate, which necessarily means a lot of the brightest kids are just going to be bored most of the time.
Correct. Yeah, that's definitely an advantage. One of the things that I mean, this is kind of romantic thinking back in the olden days, the one-room schoolhouse, right? But that's kind of what we're reproducing when we have, with one child, you can pretty much do whatever, right? Even with two children, you can kind of, your schedule allows usually to be very customary, right? If you have more than two kids, it becomes trickier as far as you have to combine your kids more.
Right.
And that's also one of the things I address in my book. However, what I was going to say is that the idea of the one-room schoolhouse is that the teacher sees the how fast the student is capable of progressing, and each student just progresses on their own speed, on their own level, as how they feel comfortable and are capable. And there is no shaming in that either. Some people are slower, some people are faster. Sometimes you have hit a roadblock, and sometimes it's just random for different kids at different times. You just never know. And we just need to be open as parents to allow our children this the advantage, to really take advantage of the fact that we can customize the education, not just the topics we teach our children and how we teach them, but also how fast we teach them the academics. How fast do we progress? Do we allow them the time that they need? And I'm not saying we should be slow and not have a high standard. I do want to plead parents that want to homeschool, keep the standard high, but because especially nowadays there is just a push against homeschooling on a state level in various states, various reasons. But I get magazines from HSLDA, I think once a quarter or something like that, and they just kind of update the reader on all the different things that are going on in different states. And there's some pushback on homeschooling in some of the states that have really not much regulation, or they have just made it too easy. And now it's like, oh, it's too easy, we have to make it harder. But anyway, to get back to the speed at which we teach our children, we can really take advantage of the fact that we are in charge. I am the one who chooses what my child does every day. The curriculum helps me to give me the information, but the curriculum does not tell me that I have to do this. It does tell you, it gives you a schedule or a recommended schedule, but I'm really the one who's making the choice here, which is a great advantage.
And the other thing too, that at least the experience with my children is that it's fun to learn about the world. I mean, like I think it's school tends to make it a monotonous, and it's a chore now, and you got to go to school, you got to do your homework, as opposed to, do you want to understand how things work? Well, here, let me show you. And
yes.
So it's, I think for people who haven't seen it, and to realize, if they're like, oh my gosh, I hated going to school, I wouldn't want to have to be in charge of being the slave master for my kids, going through the times table. And if that's the mentality, that's going to be a drudgery. But yeah, if you can flip it. Just one quick story, Susanne. Again, we weren't homeschooling him, but I was showing my eldest, when he was younger, stuff on the side. I had a dry erase board, and I was showing him when he was 7, pretty complex math stuff that would be for an undergrad math major. But I wasn't telling him. I was just showing it to him like it was normal, like I was teaching him what a screwdriver was or something. And it was time to go to the park. And I said, okay, well, we can do this tomorrow. Let's go to the park. And he said, oh, I don't need to go to the park. Can you keep showing me that? So he's like a little kid who opted for me to show him more college level math stuff instead of going to the park. But it was partly because I didn't tell him, this is really hard. I just I was just showing it to him like it was normal. And
kids are like sponges. Yeah. They want to know. And you as the parent can pick up on these hints. You see, oh my goodness, my son loves this. So where else can I add this? Now it becomes very tricky for me, for instance, with my kids, when I see something immediately, oh, let's make this a subject. No, that's probably one of the things that is very tricky for homeschool parents, is that just because our kids display interest doesn't mean we should academize it, that we should put it on the schedule and now make it a subject. We should keep it fun. That's definitely one of the things I've learned as a mom.
Well, just that leads into this last question I was going to ask you. One of your sections is titled, what would I do differently if you could do it all over again? So do you want to tease some of the lessons you put in there?
Yes, actually, that's a good question, because I don't exactly, because I rewrote that so many times.
So you decided, what would I say in this section if I could rewrite it?
Yes, actually. Oh my goodness. So I know one of the things that I put in there is my role as a parent and as a teacher is, as a homeschool family, that is a fine line between being a teacher and being a mom. Mm-hmm. And there are dads out there that homeschool their kids. So it's, I try to keep the book neutral, where it's not always mom or dad, but parent. Right. But anyway, I'm a mom, so I'm just going to speak from my perspective. Yeah. So that is something that I noticed is whenever we had activities outside of school, or it's just difficult not to turn everything into a school grade, because I'm trying so hard to give my kids the best education possible. And all of a sudden their behavior, in a school setting, the teacher might not even care. They're like, that's normal behavior, right? And they don't even have time to fiddle with this. But I see my kids and I'm thinking, I've messed this up. I need so I need to chill, really. And I mean, my youngest is, she's now in college. So now I can, look back and kind of, with a critical eye, look at myself and pass it on to the next generation of homeschool parents. That's something I struggled with, for sure, is not to turn everything into a school grade or into school academics, but to let kids be kids and enjoy it, and not get high blood pressure just because my child seems to be, it's like this. I mean, this is not just homeschool parents, but let's say your son, your daughter is in public, and somebody asks them a question that you just think they should just nail it. Spell this word, or like, what's 5 times 8, right? And you're just thinking like, I hope they answer it correctly, right? Because it's a reflection on me if they don't know it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, on homeschool parents, that feels like that hits home, because it's a direct reflection on me. Now, it isn't really, because my child obviously needs to have a part in his education, but that's really a fine line, and I need to just really, it's okay. That happened to me, my kids, numerous times, where I thought they should just nail it, and then they either blew it off and thought, whatever, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, what have I taught them? I haven't learned anything, right? So that's one of the things. Just chill. It's okay. Right. And don't turn everything into a grade. And you're not, a bad parent or teacher if your kids don't know how to spell something in front of somebody else. They might have just goofed. My kids turned everything into a joke sometimes. So they purposefully spelled it wrong. I don't know.
All right. Okay, well, that's good advice and a good place to wrap up this discussion. So, folks, my guest has been Susanne Gibbs. The book is Homeschooling Quick Start. Thanks, Susanne, for your time and for writing this book, and I hope a lot of people will check it out.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to talk about it.
Thanks, folks, for tuning in. See you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.